In the rain-soaked courtyard of Westfield Academy, a quiet 16-year-old girl was about to face her worst nightmare. What started as a routine walk to class took a shocking turn when three popular bullies cornered her by the bike racks. Amira Rahimi wasn't your typical high school student. For 9 years, she had spent her life training in the brutal Indonesian martial art of Pencak Silat, known for her disciplined restraint and philosophical approach to conflict. When Chase Donovan and his gang grabbed her hijab and attempted to humiliate her on camera, they had no idea they were walking into a trap of their own making. Amira's lightning-fast response that would lead to a complete transformation of the school's toxic culture. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Amira Rahimi gripped her leather satchel tightly as she navigated Westfield Academy's marble corridors. At 16, she stood barely 5 feet 2, with long dark hair that she kept covered by a simple hijab. Her modest cardigan draped over her petite frame. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose gave her a studious appearance that seemed to make her invisible to most students rushing past. She had been at Westfield for 3 weeks since relocating from Tehran, and her reserved demeanor combined with her soft Persian accent made her feel like a stranger in a foreign land. "Just keep your head down and survive the day," she whispered to herself in Farsi, clutching her literature textbook closer to her chest. Amira was naturally introverted, preferring the company of books to socializing, and adjusting to this prestigious American prep school felt overwhelming. She missed Tehran, where she had close friends and encouraging teachers who understood her quiet nature. Here, she felt like a ghost drifting through hallways, except when she desperately wished she could actually disappear. Well, look. Who's trying to sneak past unnoticed?" A voice boomed near the trophy cases. Amira's heart sank as she recognized the voice. Chase Donovan dominated the senior class with ruthless authority. Tall and athletic at 18, he had dirty blonde hair and the swagger that came from being captain of the football team. His entourage included Mason Quinn, a wiry kid with red hair and a cruel smile, and Blake Monroe, whose massive frame and perpetual scowl made him look like he was always ready for a fight. They had spotted Amira on her first day and immediately marked her as easy prey. "Where are you rushing off to, Vale?" Chase's voice carried that familiar mocking tone. He had coined that nickname after seeing her hijab, and it had spread through the school like wildfire. Most students now used it instead of her real name. Amira quickened her pace toward her AP literature class, but Mason stepped into her path. "Didn't your mama teach you proper manners back in? Where was it, Iraq?" "Iran," Amira corrected softly, her cheeks burning. "And I'm simply trying to reach class on time." Her accent made the words sound delicate, almost musical, which only seemed to amuse them more. "She's correcting us, guys," Blake snorted, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "So polite. What did they teach you over there, Vale? How to be a pushover?" Students flowed past them like water around rocks, most avoiding eye contact. Amira had learned quickly that Westfield operated on a rigid social hierarchy, and nobody wanted to attract Chase's attention by defending someone at the bottom. Even Mr. Henderson, who was supposed to be supervising the halls, had conveniently vanished when he spotted the brewing confrontation. "Please just leave me alone," Amira murmured, attempting to sidestep around Mason. "Please just leave me alone," Mason mimicked in a high-pitched voice, causing nearby students to snicker. "What's the magic word, Vale?" Amira's hands trembled as she clutched her bag straps. Back in Tehran, her mother had taught her Pencak Silat from the age of 7, the brutal Indonesian martial art that her mother had learned during her own youth. But Mamang had always stressed that violence was the absolute last resort, and these boys were much larger than her. Besides, causing a scene might result in suspension, and her family couldn't afford any complications that might threaten her education. Chase moved closer, and Amira caught the scent of his aggressive cologne mixed with the energy drinks he constantly consumed. I think Vale needs to learn some respect. What do you say, boys? Before Amira could react, Chase grabbed her satchel and yanked it from her shoulders. The contents exploded across the hallway floor. Textbooks, notebooks, pens, and carefully completed assignments scattered everywhere. Students trampled over her belongings without a second glance, and Amira felt tears sting her eyes as she watched a week's worth of work being destroyed. Oops, Chase said with mock concern. Clumsy me. Amira dropped to her knees, frantically gathering papers, many now torn and marked with muddy shoe prints. The 5-minute warning bell echoed through the halls, meaning she'd be late even if. She sprinted to class now. Miss Kaminsky had already warned the class that tardiness would result in detention. This is pathetic, Blake remarked as Amira crawled around collecting her scattered materials. Look at her scrambling around like a mouse. That's why we call her Vale. She's always trying to hide. Mason kicked one of her notebooks further down the corridor, and Amira had to chase after it. By the time she collected everything, the hallway was nearly empty and the final bell was ringing. She arrived at literature class 4 minutes late, face flushed and hair disheveled, earning Miss Kaminsky's disapproving glare and her classmates' barely concealed snickers. Just 7 more months, Amira told herself, sliding into her seat in the back row. 7 more months until graduation, then university somewhere far from here. Somewhere she could be herself without fear. The routine persisted for weeks like a slow-burning nightmare. Chase's gang had turned tormenting Amira into their personal entertainment, and she felt like prey being circled by patient hunters. In the cafeteria, they would make loud comments about her appearance while she ate in solitude. Hey, does anyone else smell curry? Mason would announce, loud enough for half the dining hall to hear, even though Amira always brought simple sandwiches from home. Or is that just the scent of failure? They'd accidentally collide with her in the corridors, causing her to drop her books. Blake seemed to take particular pleasure in this, using his massive frame to bump into her, so hard she'd stumble into the wall. Sorry, Vale, he'd grunt with a smirk. Didn't see you there. In physical education, they ensured she was always picked last for teams. Then Mason would deliberately aim dodgeballs at her head during games, claiming they were accidents whenever Coach Martinez wasn't looking directly at them. Come on, Vale, he'd taunt. Where's that fighting spirit? Or, do they not teach sports where you come from? Amira developed survival tactics that would have impressed a war strategist. She memorized their class schedules and used alternative routes between her own classes. She began eating lunch in the library instead of the cafeteria, claiming she needed to study. She even relocated her locker to the opposite wing of the school, adding 10 minutes to her daily commute but gaining precious moments of peace. But Westfield Academy wasn't that large, and they always found her eventually. The worst part wasn't the physical intimidation, it was the psychological warfare. They had turned her name into a joke, her accent into entertainment, and her quiet nature into a sign of weakness. She'd catch students whispering Vale and giggling when she passed. Teachers who had initially been kind grew distant, as if her association with trouble made her radioactive. During these dark weeks, Amira would lie awake at night remembering her mother's words. Pencak Silat is not about hurting others, Azizum. It's about protecting yourself and those you love. But remember, once you cross that line, there's no going back. People will see you differently. You must be absolutely certain it's necessary. Her mother, Nasrin, had been a formidable woman who'd learned the martial art during her youth in Indonesia, where her own father had been stationed as a diplomat. She'd taught Amira not just the physical techniques, but the philosophy behind them, that true strength came from restraint, from knowing you could defend yourself but choosing not to unless absolutely necessary. Violence is easy, my daughter, Nasrin had said during one of their training sessions in their small apartment in Tehran. Any fool can throw a punch. But wisdom, knowing when to fight and when to walk away, that is the mark of a true warrior. Now, watching Chase and his friends approach her yet again by the water fountains, Amira felt that familiar conflict raging inside her. Her mother's voice whispered restraint, but another part of her, a part that had been growing stronger each day, whispered something else entirely. Well, Vale, Chase drawled, flanked by his usual companions. We've been thinking about you. Amira's pulse quickened. She clutched her books closer and scanned for escape routes, but they had positioned themselves strategically to block all exits. Mason was recording with his phone, as he'd started doing recently, capturing their pranks for social media. Yeah, Mason added, stepping closer. We've been wondering something. You're always so quiet, so scared. What are you hiding under all those baggy clothes? Blake cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the hallway walls like gunshots. Maybe she's got some secret ninja skills, he said with a laugh that sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. Maybe she's gonna karate chop us. Amira's eyes widened as she realized what they were suggesting. Please, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just leave me alone. I haven't done anything to you. That's the problem, Chase said, his smile turning predatory. You think you're too good to talk to us. Too pure to be social. Maybe we need to help you loosen up a little. The hallway was mostly empty, the lunch period was ending, and most students were either still in the cafeteria or heading to their next classes. Ms. Kaminsky walked past at the far end of the corridor, saw what was happening, and deliberately looked away. Mason kept filming, his phone capturing every moment of Amira's growing panic. This is gonna be so good, he muttered under his breath. The mysterious Vale finally loses her cool. But Amira didn't lose her cool. Instead, she felt something else happening, a familiar stillness settling over her mind. The same focused calm her mother had taught her to cultivate during their training sessions. Her breathing slowed, her vision sharpened, every muscle in her body relaxed, ready to respond. Last chance, Vale, Chase said, stepping even closer. Be friendly, or we'll help you be friendly. Amira looked at each of them and turned Chase with his entitled smirk. Mason with his phone held high, Blake with his massive fists. Then she spoke, and her voice was different now. Steady, clear, dangerous. My name, she said quietly, is Amira Rahimi. And you're about to learn exactly what my mother taught me. The storm hit Westfield Academy like a metaphor made manifest dark clouds gathering overhead, as if the universe itself was preparing for what was about to unfold. Rain pelted the windows of the main building, and most students had retreated indoors during the lunch period, leaving the outdoor courtyard near the bike racks largely deserted. Amira had been walking to her next class when she spotted them waiting for her. Chase, Mason, and Blake had positioned themselves strategically by the bike racks, blocking her usual route to the science building. The courtyard was empty except for a few students hurrying between buildings with their heads down against the rain. Perfect timing, Vale, Chase called out, his voice carrying that familiar cruel undertone. We've been waiting for you. Amira's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they had planned this. The empty courtyard, the storm providing cover, the isolation, it was all deliberate. She clutched her books tighter and searched desperately for an escape route, but they had cornered her perfectly. Yeah, Mason added, his phone already out and recording. We've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about what you're hiding under all those baggy clothes. Blake said nothing, but his presence was threatening enough. He stood with his arms crossed, his massive frame blocking any potential escape toward the main building. Rain dripped from his hair into his eyes, making him look even more menacing. Please, Amira said, her voice barely audible over the rain. I haven't done anything to you. Just let me pass. That's the thing, Vale, Chase said, stepping closer. You think you're too good for us, too pure, too modest. Maybe it's time someone taught you what American schools are really like. Amira's mind raced. She thought of her mother, of their training sessions, of the philosophical discussions about when violence was justified. Violence should never be your first choice, Azizam, her mother had said. But when someone tries to strip away your dignity, your safety, your very sense of self, that's when you show them what strength really means. Look at her, Mason laughed, still filming. She's shaking like a leaf. This is gonna be viral gold. Please, Amira whispered. But even as she said it, she could feel something shifting inside her. The fear was still there, but underneath, it was something else, something that had been building for weeks of humiliation and torment. Chase grabbed the hem of her hijab. Let's see what you're really hiding under here, Vale. Don't, Amira started, but Blake moved to grab her arms, pinning them behind her back. Come on, Vale, Chase taunted, his fingers tugging at her headscarf. Don't be shy. We just want to see the real you. Mason angled his phone for a better shot, practically salivating at the prospect of capturing her humiliation. This is perfect, he muttered. Wait till everyone sees this. But as Chase's hand pulled harder at her hijab, as Blake's grip tightened on her arms, as Mason's phone captured every moment of her violation, something inside Amira snapped. Not broke, snapped. Into place, like a blade clicking into its handle. The rain seemed to slow around her. The sounds of the courtyard faded. She could hear her mother's voice, clear as if Amira Rahimi was standing right beside her. When they try to take your dignity, my daughter, you show them what dignity really looks like. You show them what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness. Chase yanked harder at her hijab, and Amira felt the fabric loosening. She saw Blake's satisfied smirk, heard Mason's excited breathing behind his phone, witnessed the casual cruelty of boys who thought they could take whatever they wanted. My name, Amira said quietly, her voice cutting through the rain like a blade, is Amira Rahimi. Chase paused, something in her tone making him hesitate. And my mother, Amira continued, her voice growing stronger, taught me that some lines should never be crossed. Blake's grip loosened slightly, confused by the change in her demeanor. She taught me Pencak Silat, Amira said, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just decided to stop running. She taught me that true strength isn't about size or numbers or how loud you can yell. It's about knowing exactly when to strike, exactly how to move, exactly what happens when you push someone too far. Mason's phone wavered as he sensed an shift in the air. And right now, Amira whispered, her voice deadly calm, you're about to learn why Pencak Silat is called the art of war. Chase's hand was still tangled in her hijab. Blake's massive arms were still trying to restrain her. Mason's phone was still recording. The rain was still falling. But in the next 30 seconds, everything was going to change. Because Amira Rahimi was done being a victim. And they were about to discover that the quiet girl from Tehran had been trained by one of the most dangerous women they'd never heard of. The storm wasn't just overhead anymore. It was about to begin. What happened next would be replayed on phones across Westfield Academy for months to come, analyzed frame by frame like footage from a nature documentary showing a predator's fatal miscalculation. Chase's hand was still tangled in Amira's hijab when she moved. Not frantically, not desperately, but with the fluid precision of someone who had trained for this moment her entire life. Her right elbow snapped backward into Blake's solar plexus. With surgical accuracy, the same technique her mother had drilled into her 1,000 times in their Tehran apartment. Blake's eyes bulged as the air exploded from his lungs. His massive arms, which had seemed so intimidating moments before, fell away from Amira like wet rope. He stumbled backward, gasping like a fish pulled from water, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. What the chase started, but he never finished the sentence. Amira spun toward him with the grace of a dancer, and the lethality of a viper. Her knee drove upward into his groin with enough force to lift him off his feet. Chase's face went from arrogant to agonized in the space of a heartbeat, and he released her hijab as he doubled over, a high-pitched wheeze escaping his lips. Mason, still holding his phone, finally understood that this wasn't going according to plan. He tried to back away, but Amira was already moving toward him. Her hand shot out and struck his throat with the precision of a surgeon, not hard enough to cause permanent damage, but hard enough to make him drop his phone and clutch, his neck gasping for air. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. Chase was on his knees in the muddy courtyard, clutching himself and making sounds that would have been comical if they hadn't been so pathetic. Blake was leaning against the bike rack, struggling to breathe and looking at Amira like she'd just revealed herself to be a supernatural entity. Mason was on his hands and knees, his precious phone lying in a puddle, forgotten in his struggle to remember how to swallow. Amira stood in the center of the courtyard, rain streaming down her face, her hijab slightly askew but still in place. She wasn't even breathing hard. Her wire-rimmed glasses had stayed perfectly positioned on her nose throughout the entire encounter. "That," she said calmly, adjusting her hijab with the same careful precision she'd used to destroy them, "was Pencak Silat, the martial art my mother taught me when I was 7 years old." Chase tried to speak but could only manage a strangled groan. "She learned it in Indonesia," Amira continued, her voice carrying clearly over the rain, "from masters who understood that size and strength mean nothing without technique. That brutality is the weapon of the weak and precision is the tool of the strong." Blake attempted to straighten up but immediately doubled over again, still fighting for breath. "My mother taught me that violence should always be the last resort," Amira sighed, walking slowly toward Chase, who flinched away from her approach. "She taught me to endure insults, to ignore taunts, to turn the other cheek. But she also taught me that some lines should never be crossed." She crouched down so she was at Chase's eye level. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed more terrifying than any shout. "When you tried to strip away my hijab," she said, "you crossed that line. When you decided my dignity was your entertainment, you crossed that line. When you thought you could humiliate me because I was different, because I was quiet, because I was alone, you crossed that line." Chase's eyes were wide with pain and something else, fear. For the first time in his life, he was looking at someone who had power over him, and he didn't know how to process it. "I gave you chances," Amira continued. "Weeks of chances. I tried to avoid you, tried to ignore you, tried to be invisible. But you wouldn't let me. You kept pushing, kept escalating, kept taking more and more until you decided to take the one thing I would never let you have." She stood up, looking down at the 3 boys who had made her life hell for weeks. They looked nothing like the confident predators who had cornered her just minutes ago. They looked like what they really were, scared children who had finally encountered someone they couldn't intimidate. "My name is Amira Rahimi," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "I am from Tehran, Iran. I am a Muslim. I am quiet because I choose to be, not because I am weak. And if any of you, or anyone else in this school, ever tries to touch me, my hijab, or my dignity again, you will discover that what just happened was me being gentle." In the distance, Jordan Lee stood pressed against the science building wall, his own phone in his hand. Unlike Mason, he hadn't been recording for entertainment. He'd been walking to class when he heard the commotion, and something about the scene had made him stop. He'd witnessed the entire encounter, and unlike the other students who had looked away from Amira's suffering for weeks, he couldn't look away from this. As sirens began to wail in the distance, someone had called for help when they saw 3 students down in the courtyard. Jordan made a decision that would change everything. He saved the video to his phone, but not to mock or shame. He saved it because he understood that what he'd just witnessed wasn't just a fight. It was a girl refusing to be a victim anymore. It was justice served with surgical precision. It was 30 seconds that would ripple through Westfield Academy like an earthquake, changing everything that came after. The video spread through Westfield Academy faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the time the paramedics had finished checking Chase, Blake, and Mason for serious injuries, there were none. Just bruised egos and wounded pride. Half the school had seen the footage of their humiliation. The initial reactions were electric. Students who had never spoken Amira's name were suddenly whispering it in hallways. The girl who had been invisible for months was now the only thing anyone could talk about. Did you see what Vale did to Chase Donovan? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Holy shit, she dropped all 3 of them. Where did she learn to fight like that? I heard she's some kind of ninja from Iran. The whispers followed Amira as she walked through the halls, but they were different now. Instead of mockery, there was awe. Instead of dismissal, there was respect. Students who had looked through her for weeks now stepped aside when she passed. Not out of fear, but out of something approaching reverence. Amira Rahimi arrived at Westfield Academy 30 minutes after receiving a frantic call from the school secretary. At 21, she was everything Amira wasn't: outspoken, assertive, confident in a way that commanded attention. She strode through the main office in her pre-law student attire, her dark hair uncovered and her eyes blazing with protective fury. "Where is my sister?" she demanded of the secretary, who seemed to shrink behind her desk. "She's in the principal's office with Mr. Salazar," the woman stammered. "There was an incident." Layla's expression could have melted steel. An incident? 3 boys corner my 16-year-old sister and try to assault her, and you call it an incident? The secretary's face went pale. I don't know the details." "Then get me someone who does, now." Inside Mr. Salazar's office, Amira sat in a chair facing the principal's desk, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had already given her statement, recounting the weeks of harassment that had led to the confrontation. Her voice had been steady, her recollection precise, her demeanor completely controlled. Mr. Salazar, a thin man in his 50s with carefully groomed hair and political instincts, was struggling to navigate the situation. The Donovan family had donated a new gymnasium to the school just 2 years ago. The Monroe family had 3 children enrolled at Westfield. The Quinn family had been part of the school's legacy families for generations. But the video was already viral on social media, and the last thing Westfield Academy needed was a scandal involving the assault of a Muslim student. "Miss Rahimi," he said carefully, "I understand you were defending yourself, but the level of violence was proportional to the threat." Layla's voice cut through the office like a blade as she entered without knocking. "My sister was being sexually assaulted by 3 boys, and she defended herself. If you have a problem with that, we can discuss it with our attorney." Mr. Salazar's face went through several shades of pale. "Ms. Rahimi, I'm sure we can resolve this matter internally." "Can we?" Layla moved to stand behind Amira's chair, her hand resting protectively on her sister's shoulder. "Because from what I understand, this matter has been ongoing for weeks. My sister has been harassed, bullied, and intimidated by these boys repeatedly, and your staff has done nothing." "That's not entirely accurate. Show me the incident reports," Layla demanded. "Show me the disciplinary actions taken against these boys for their previous behavior toward my sister." The silence stretched uncomfortably. "That's what I thought," Layla continued. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to conduct a full investigation into the systematic harassment my sister has endured. You're going to interview every student who witnessed their behavior. You're going to review any security footage from the hallways. And you're going to take appropriate disciplinary action." Mr. Salazar shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The boys were injured. The boys were stopped, Layla corrected. By a 16-year-old girl who was defending herself against 3 attackers. If you want to press charges against my sister for defending herself, we'll be happy to countersue for the school's failure to protect her from ongoing harassment and assault. A knock at the door interrupted the tense conversation. Jordan Lee stood in the doorway, his phone clutched in his hand and his face pale but determined. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I need to speak with you about what happened in the courtyard." Mr. Salazar looked annoyed. "Young man, this is a private meeting. I recorded the whole thing," Jordan said, his voice growing stronger. "I have video evidence of everything that happened, and I think you need to see it." Layla and Amira exchanged glances. This was the boy who had been standing by the science building, the one who had witnessed everything but hadn't run away. "I'm Jordan Lee," he said, addressing Amira directly. "I'm in your P literature class. I saw what they did to you, and I saw how you defended yourself. And I think everyone needs to know the truth." He held up his phone, and even from across the room, they could see the clear footage of Chase grabbing Amira's hijab, Blake restraining her arms, and Mason recording their assault. The video showed exactly what had happened, and it showed that Amira had only acted after being physically attacked. "This," Jordan said firmly, "is what really happened. Not 3 boys getting beaten up by a girl. 3 boys assaulting a girl and getting exactly what they deserved." Mr. Salazar stared at the phone screen, his political instincts warring with his legal ones. The video was damning evidence of the boy's behavior and perfect justification for Amira's response. "I'll need a copy of that video," he said finally. "I've already uploaded it to the cloud," Jordan replied. "Multiple copies. Because people need to see what happens when you stand up to bullies." Layla smiled for the first time since entering the office. "Smart boy," she said approvingly. Then she turned back to Mr. Salazar. "So, about that investigation." The next morning, Westfield Academy buzzed with an energy that was equal parts excitement and tension. The video had gone beyond viral, it had become a phenomenon. Local news stations were calling, social media was exploding, and parents were demanding answers. By 8 a.m., Mr. Salazar's office looked like a war room. The video evidence was undeniable, witness statements were piling up, and the school's legal team was working overtime to manage the crisis. Chase's parents, Robert and Patricia Donovan, sat stiffly in leather chairs across from the principal's desk. Robert's face was red with indignation, while Patricia clutched her purse like a shield. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Robert blustered. "Our son was viciously attacked by that girl, and you're treating him like he's the criminal." "Mr. Donovan," Mr. Salazar said carefully, "we have video evidence showing your son grabbing Miss Rahimi's hijab and attempting to remove it while she was being physically restrained by his friends." "It was just a prank," Patricia protested. "Boys will be boys." She completely overreacted. Layla, who had been sitting quietly beside Amira, leaned forward. "Mrs. Donovan, your son and his friends cornered my sister in an isolated area and attempted to forcibly remove her religious covering while recording it for social media. In what universe do you consider sexual assault and religious harassment to be a prank?" The room fell silent. Even Robert seemed to deflate slightly at the stark description of his son's actions. "Furthermore," Layla continued, "this wasn't an isolated incident. Your son and his friends have been systematically harassing my sister for weeks. We have witness statements, and now we have video evidence of their behavior escalating to physical assault." Mr. Salazar flipped open a thick folder. "We've spoken to 17 students who witnessed different incidents of harassment. The pattern is clear and well documented. One by one, the testimonies unfolded. Students who had once been too afraid to speak up were now sharing their stories, inspired by Amira's bravery and Jordan's evidence. Isabella Martinez, a sophomore, recalled seeing Chase intentionally knock Amira's books from her hands several times. I wanted to help, she said, her eyes welling with tears, but I was scared they'd come after me next. David Kim, a junior, described watching Blake trap Amira by her locker, using his size to intimidate her. He didn't touch her, but he didn't need to. The threat was clear. Sarah Thompson, a senior, remembered hearing Mason make racist remarks about Amira's accent and cultural background. It was appalling, she said, but nobody stepped in. With each testimony, the full scope of the situation became clearer. What happened in the courtyard wasn't a one-time event. It was the outcome of weeks of escalating harassment that the school had ignored. When Jordan stepped forward to give his statement, his voice remained steady despite his nerves. "I've kept quiet most of my life," he said. "I know what it's like to be invisible, to be afraid. When I saw what was happening to Amira, I knew exactly what it was because I had been there. But I saw something else: courage. She didn't want to fight. She tried everything else first. But when they crossed that line, when they attacked her dignity, she showed them what real strength is." He looked at Amira, who sat quietly beside her sister. "What you did wasn't violent," he said to her. "It was justice. You were the one who finally said enough, and it gave the rest of us the courage to speak up too." The Donovans exchanged uneasy glances. The evidence against their son was undeniable. "What do you want?" Robert asked, his earlier bravado fading. Layla looked at Amira, who nodded slightly. "We want formal disciplinary action against all 3 boys. We want a public apology, not just to my sister, but to the entire school community. We want mandatory sensitivity training for all students and staff. And we want policies in place to ensure this never happens to another student." "And if we refuse?" Patricia asked, her voice faint. "Then we'll file criminal charges for assault and hate crimes," Layla responded plainly. "We'll sue the school for failing to protect my sister. And we'll make sure this story gets national attention." Mr. Salazar cleared his throat. "The boys will be suspended for 2 weeks. They'll attend sensitivity training and perform community service, and they'll issue a formal apology. In writing," Layla added, "and in person." "Agreed." As the meeting wrapped up, Amira spoke for the first time in over an hour. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying the same strength she had shown in the courtyard. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I want change. I want other students to know they don't have to suffer in silence. I want them to understand that being different isn't being weak. And I want them to realize that sometimes standing up for yourself is the bravest thing you can do." She stood, her dignity intact despite everything she had endured. "My mother taught me that strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can endure before you decide you don't have to endure anymore. I hope Chase, Blake, and Mason learned that lesson without having to learn it the hard way." As they left the office, Jordan walked up beside them. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Amira. She nodded. "Will you teach me?" Mr. Salazar flipped open a thick folder. "We've spoken to 17 students who witnessed different incidents of harassment. The pattern is clear and well documented. One by one, the testimonies unfolded. Students who had once been too afraid to speak up were now sharing their stories, inspired by Amira's bravery and Jordan's evidence. Isabella Martinez, a sophomore, recalled seeing Chase intentionally knock Amira's books from her hands several times. "I wanted to help," she said, her eyes welling with tears, "but I was scared they'd come after me next." David Kim, a junior, described watching Blake trap Amira by her locker, using his size to intimidate her. He didn't touch her, but he didn't need to. The threat was clear. Sarah Thompson, a senior, remembered hearing Mason make racist remarks about Amira's accent and cultural background. "It was appalling," she said, but nobody stepped in. With each testimony, the full scope of the situation became clearer. What happened in the courtyard wasn't a one-time event. It was the outcome of weeks of escalating harassment that the school had ignored. When Jordan stepped forward to give his statement, his voice remained steady despite his nerves. "I've kept quiet most of my life," he said. "I know what it's like to be invisible, to be afraid. When I saw what was happening to Amira, I knew exactly what it was because I had been there. But I saw something else, courage. She didn't want to fight. She tried everything else first. But when they crossed that line, when they attacked her dignity, she showed them what real strength is." He looked at Amira, who sat quietly beside her sister. "What you did wasn't violent," he said to her. "It was justice. You were the one who finally said enough, and it gave the rest of us the courage to speak up too." The Donovans exchanged uneasy glances. The evidence against their son was undeniable. "What do you want?" Robert asked, his earlier bravado fading. Layla looked at Amira, who nodded slightly. "We want formal disciplinary action against all 3 boys. We want a public apology, not just to my sister, but to the entire school community. We want mandatory sensitivity training for all students and staff. And we want policies in place to ensure this never happens to another student. And if we refuse?" Patricia asked, her voice faint. "Then we'll file criminal charges for assault and hate crimes," Layla responded plainly. "We'll sue the school for failing to protect my sister. And we'll make sure this story gets national attention," he asked. "Not how to fight, but how to be brave like you were." Amira smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in weeks. "Being brave isn't about not being afraid," she said. "It's about being afraid and choosing to do the right thing anyway. You already know how to do that, Jordan. You proved it when you recorded that video and when you came forward to tell the truth." As they walked through the halls of Westfield Academy, something had fundamentally changed. The girl who had been invisible was now impossible to ignore. The silence that had protected the bullies was broken, and the culture of fear that had allowed harassment to flourish was beginning to crumble. Change, Amira realized, really could happen in 30 seconds. Sometimes it just took someone willing to stand up and show everyone else what courage looked like. The transformation was immediate and undeniable. When Amira walked through Westfield Academy's hallways the morning after the disciplinary meeting, she no longer felt like a ghost drifting unseen through the corridors. Students stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. The girl who had been invisible for months was now the most visible person in school. "Amira." A voice called out near her locker. She turned to see Isabella Martinez approaching, her face flushed with nervous determination. Isabella was a sophomore like Amira, but where Amira had been isolated, Isabella had always been part of the social fabric of the school, not popular exactly, but accepted, included. "I wanted to apologize," Isabella said, her words coming out in a rush. "I saw what they were doing to you for weeks, and I never said anything. I never helped. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." Amira studied the girl's face, seeing genuine remorse. "There. You're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters. Can I?" Isabella hesitated, then pushed forward. "Can I sit with you at lunch? I mean, if you want company. I understand if you prefer to be alone." For the first time in weeks, Amira felt something she'd almost forgotten, the possibility of friendship. "I'd like that," she said with a small smile. The lunch period that day was unlike any Amira had experienced at Westfield. Isabella kept her word, sitting across from Amira in the cafeteria and engaging her in genuine conversation about their shared AP literature class. But they weren't alone for long. Jordan Lee appeared with his tray, asking quietly if he could join them. Then came David Kim, the junior who had testified about Blake's intimidation tactics. Soon, Sarah Thompson approached the senior who had witnessed Mason's racist comments. "We wanted to thank you," Sarah said, settling into a chair beside Amira. Not just for standing up for yourself, but for showing the rest of us that we don't have to tolerate this stuff anymore. You inspired something, David added. Students are reporting harassment now, instead of just enduring it. The anonymous tip line Mr. Salazar set up? It's been flooded with reports since your video went viral. Amira looked around the table at these students who had found their courage because she had found hers. My mother used to say that bravery is contagious, she said softly. I never understood what she meant until now. The social dynamics of Westfield were shifting in ways both subtle and dramatic. Teachers who had previously ignored the casual cruelty in their classrooms were suddenly more attentive. Ms. Kaminsky, who had looked the other way during countless incidents of harassment, found herself unable to meet Amira's eyes when she entered literature class. But it was during that very class that the most significant change became apparent. Ms. Kaminsky was discussing themes of courage in To Kill a Mockingbird when Mason Quinn raised his hand. Mason had returned to school after his suspension, but he was a shadow of his former self. The boy who had once dominated conversations with his cruel wit now sat quietly in the back corner, his phone nowhere to be seen. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Ms. Kaminsky, he said, his words careful and measured. I think the book is saying that real courage isn't about being the strongest or the loudest. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. The classroom fell silent. This was the same boy who had spent weeks tormenting Amira, who had recorded her humiliation for social media entertainment. Ms. Kaminsky nodded slowly. That's an insightful observation, Mason. Asterisk. Can you elaborate? Mason's eyes flickered toward Amira, then back to his desk. I think it's saying that sometimes the people we think are weak are actually the strongest ones, because they choose kindness even when they have the power to choose something else. After class, as students filed out, Mason lingered behind. Amira was gathering her books when he approached her desk, his usual swagger replaced by nervous energy. Amira, he said, using her real name for the first time since she'd arrived at Westfield. Can I talk to you? She looked up at him, seeing something in his face she'd never seen before, genuine remorse, mixed with something that might have been respect. I wanted to apologize, he said, his voice barely audible. Not because I have to, I do have to write a formal apology as part of my punishment, but because I actually mean it. What we did to you was wrong. Not just that day in the courtyard, but all of it. The names, the harassment, the way we treated you like you weren't even human. Amira set down her books and gave him her full attention. Why? She asked simply. Mason struggled with the question. Because we could, I guess. Because you were different, and that made you an easy target. Because Chase made it seem like it was just harmless fun, and I wanted to fit in with him. He paused, running a hand through his red hair. Because I was a coward who built himself up by tearing others down. And now? Amira asked. Now I know what real strength looks like, Mason said. You could have seriously hurt us that day. You had the skill, you had the justification, you had the anger, but you didn't. You used exactly enough force to stop. US and no more. That's not weakness, that's control. That's power used responsibly. He took a shaky breath. I wanted you to know that I'm getting help. Real help, not just the mandatory counseling. I'm talking to someone about why I thought hurting people was funny. About why I needed to be part of a group that required me to be cruel. Amira studied his face, looking for any sign of manipulation or false contrition. She found none, only a young man who seemed to be genuinely grappling with the ugliness of his own behavior. I forgive you, she said finally. Mason's eyes widened. Just like that? Forgiveness isn't for you, Amira explained. It's for me. Carrying anger is exhausting, and I've been tired for too long. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean there aren't consequences. I know, Mason said quickly. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that what you did changed something in me, made me want to be better." As Mason left the classroom, Amira felt a strange sense of completion. The boy who had tormented her was gone, replaced by someone who was at least trying to be better. It wasn't redemption that would take time and consistent action, but it was a beginning. Blake Monroe, when Amira encountered him in the hallway later that week, was a different story entirely. The massive junior avoided eye contact, flinching whenever he saw her approaching. He'd switched his route between classes to minimize their interactions, and when they did cross paths, he pressed himself against the wall as if afraid she might attack him. The irony wasn't lost on Amira. The boy who had used his size to intimidate her was now intimidated by someone half his weight. But there was no satisfaction in his fear, only a sad understanding that some people learned respect only through defeat. Chase Donovan remained notably absent from school even after his suspension ended. Rumors swirled that his parents had transferred him to a private military academy upstate, unable to face the social consequences of his actions at Westfield. Whether true or not, his absence created a power vacuum that was slowly being filled by students who led through compassion rather than cruelty. The most surprising change came from an unexpected source. During lunch on Friday, as Amira sat with her growing circle of friends, a familiar figure approached their table. It was Tyler Blackwood, not one of the boys who had attacked her, but a member of the broader social circle that had enabled their behavior through silent approval. "Amira," he said, his voice uncertain, "I wondered if I could ask you something." She nodded for him to continue. "My little sister is starting high school next year at Westfield," he said. "She's kind of shy, kind of different. She's into anime and books instead of sports and parties. I'm worried she'd be a target for the kind of treatment you faced." Tyler's admission surprised her. This was a boy who had never acknowledged her existence before, now seeking her guidance. "I wanted to ask," he continued, "if you'd be willing to teach her some of what you know. Not just the fighting stuff, but the other things. How to be strong, even when people are trying to tear you down." Amira looked around the table at Isabella, Jordan, David, and Sarah, all students who had found their voices because she had found hers first. An idea began to form in her mind. "I might have a better idea," she said slowly. "What if we started something bigger? What if we created a space where students like your sister, students like all of us, could learn how to stand up for themselves and support each other?" The seeds of what would become Westfield Academy's most transformative student organization were planted in that moment, grown from the simple recognition that courage, like cruelty, could spread from person to person. Change was coming to Westfield Academy, and it was starting with a quiet girl from Tehran who had finally found her voice. 3 weeks after their suspensions ended, Chase Donovan finally returned to Westfield Academy. The hallways that had once parted before him like the Red Sea now felt foreign and hostile. Students who had once competed for his attention now looked through him as if he were invisible. The irony was sharp and cutting. He had become what Amira had been. Chase's first day back began with a humiliation that would have been unthinkable just a month earlier. As he approached his usual lunch table, the boys who had once called themselves his friends suddenly found reasons to leave. Ryan Fletcher mumbled something about having to study and grabbed his tray. Connor Blake, no relation to Blake Monroe, claimed he'd forgotten something in his locker. Within minutes, Chase sat alone at a table that had once been the social epicenter of Westfield Academy. From across the cafeteria, he could see Amira sitting with a group that seemed to grow larger each day. Students gravitated toward her table not out of fear or social calculation, but because she had created something he never had: a genuine community built on respect rather than intimidation. The video of his humiliation had spread far beyond Westfield's walls. College recruiters who had once courted him for football scholarships had quietly stopped returning his calls. His social media accounts, once filled with admiring comments, now hosted a steady stream of criticism and mockery. But the worst part wasn't the social isolation or the destroyed reputation. The worst part was the growing understanding that Amira had been right about everything. Mason Quinn was experiencing his own reckoning. The boy who had documented cruelty for entertainment now found himself the subject of unwanted attention. Students would point and whisper when he passed, and several had confronted him directly about his role in the harassment. "How does it feel?" Emma Rodriguez had asked him pointedly in the hallway. "Being known for something you're ashamed of?" The question haunted Mason because he didn't have a good answer. His mandatory therapy sessions had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself, that his humor had always been built on others' pain, that his confidence had been borrowed from the group's cruelty, that he had no idea who he was when he wasn't tearing someone else down. Blake Monroe's response to his new reality was the most volatile. The massive junior had always solved problems with his fists, but his defeat at Amira's hands had shattered his sense of identity. He'd tried to rebuild his reputation by picking fights with other students, but word of his humiliation had spread, and nobody was impressed by his size anymore. The breaking point came during a basketball game when Blake tried to intimidate a freshman who had accidentally bumped into him. Instead of cowering, the younger student looked Blake in the eye and said, "You're the guy who got dropped by Amira Rahimi, right? Maybe pick on someone your own size. Oh wait, she is." Blake's face turned purple with rage, but before he could retaliate, 3 other students stepped between them. The era of students looking the other way while bullies operated with impunity was over. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after Chase's return, that the inevitable confrontation finally occurred. Amira was walking to her car after Martial Arts Club, the organization she had founded, was now meeting twice a week and had over 30 members, when she found Chase waiting by the student parking lot. He looked different than he had during his reign of terror. Smaller somehow, despite being the same physical size. His clothes were still expensive, his hair still perfectly styled, but the aura of untouchable confidence was gone. "Amira," he said as she approached, and she was surprised to hear genuine uncertainty in his voice. She stopped walking but didn't move closer. "Chase, I wanted to talk to you," he said. "If that's okay." Amira studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulative charm that had once made him so dangerous. Instead, she saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before: genuine remorse, mixed with what looked like respect. "I'm listening," she said carefully. Chase took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for something difficult. "I wanted to apologize. Not because my parents made me, not because the school required it, but because I actually understand now. What we did to you. What do you understand?" Amira asked. "That it was never about you," Chase said quietly. "It was about power. About making ourselves feel bigger by making someone else feel smaller. You were just..." He struggled for the word, convenient. "Different enough to target, quiet enough that we thought you wouldn't fight back." Amira waited for him to continue. "I've had a lot of time to think about why I did what I did," Chase said. "My therapist says it was about control. About needing to dominate others because I felt powerless in other parts of my life. But that doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses it." "No," Amira agreed. "It doesn't." Chase nodded, accepting her judgment. Without argument. "I wanted you to know that I'm different now. Not just because I got caught, but because you showed me what real strength looks like. You could have destroyed us that day. Physically, socially, legally, you had all the power. But you used exactly what you needed, and no more." He gestured toward the school building where students were still filing out from various after-school activities. "Look at what you've built here. Students who were afraid to speak up are finding their voices. Kids who were isolated are finding community. You turned your pain into something that helps other people. "And what have you learned from that?" Amira asked. Chase was quiet for a long moment. "That real power isn't about making people afraid of you. It's about making them better because they know you. That leadership isn't about domination, it's about service." Amira felt something shift inside her as she listened. This wasn't the arrogant boy who had terrorized her. This was someone who seemed to be genuinely grappling with his own capacity for cruelty and trying to become something better. "I forgive you," she said finally. Chase's eyes widened. "You do?" "I forgive you for my own peace," Amira clarified. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't mean we're friends. It doesn't mean you get to go back to being who you were before." "I know," Chase said quickly. "I don't want to go back to who I was before. That person was empty, hollow, built on making other people feel small." He paused, then continued with difficulty. "I've been accepted to a military academy in Virginia. My parents think it's punishment, but I asked to go. I need structure, discipline, accountability. I need to learn how to be a leader instead of a bully." Amira nodded. "That sounds like a good start." "Before I go," Chase said hesitantly, "I wanted to ask you something. Not for forgiveness, I already got more of that than I deserved, but for advice." "What kind of advice?" "How do I become someone worth respecting instead of someone worth fearing?" Amira considered the question seriously. "You start by understanding that respect is earned through consistent actions, not demanded through intimidation. You help people instead of hurting them. You use whatever privilege or power you have to lift others up instead of pushing them down." She gestured toward the school. "You see all those students who found their courage because I found mine? That's what real strength creates, more strength than others. Fear creates only more fear." Chase nodded, absorbing her words. "Thank you," he said simply. As she reached her house, Amira's phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. "The middle school group wants to know if you can come speak to them next week. They heard about what we're doing here and want to start something similar." Amira smiled as she typed her response. "Of course. Change is contagious. Let's help it spread." The quiet girl from Tehran had found her voice, and she was using it to help others find theirs. What had begun with 30 seconds of self-defense had grown into a movement that was reshaping how an entire community understood strength, courage, and the power of standing up for what was right. The revolution was spreading, one student at a time. 6 months after that rainy Tuesday in the courtyard, Amira Rahimi walked through the halls of Westfield Academy with a confidence that seemed to emanate from her very core. The wire-rimmed glasses were the same, the modest hijab still carefully arranged, but everything else about her presence had transformed. She no longer hurried through corridors with her head down. Instead, she moved with the measured grace of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. The changes around her were equally dramatic. Where once students had rushed past each other in isolated bubbles of anxiety, now there were genuine connections, conversations, and communities. The hallways buzzed with the energy of students who felt safe to be themselves. "Amira," called a familiar voice. She turned to see Mrs. Patterson, the school secretary, approaching with an official-looking envelope. "This came for you today. It looks important." Amira accepted the envelope, noting the formal letterhead of the National Teen Leadership Foundation. Her heart skipped as she carefully opened it, aware that several students had gathered around her, curious about the official correspondence. As she read the letter, her eyes widened. Jordan, who had been walking beside her, noticed her expression. "What is it?" "I've been nominated for the National Teen Courage Award," Amira said quietly, still processing the words on the page. "For advocacy and leadership in creating positive social change." The small crowd of students erupted in cheers and congratulations. Isabella hugged her tightly, while Marcus Chun, the freshman who had overcome his anxiety through the Pencak Silat club, grinned widely. "This is incredible," Isabella exclaimed. You're going to Washington, D.C. You're going to meet the Secretary of Education. But even as her friends celebrated around her, Amira found herself thinking not of the honor, but of the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the girl who had whispered prayers in Farsi just to make it through each day, who had tried so hard to be invisible that she'd nearly disappeared entirely. Later that afternoon, as the Pencak Silat Club gathered for their regular meeting, Amira stood before the now 60-member group and shared the news. The gymnasium erupted in applause, but she raised her hand for quiet. "This award isn't just for me," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "It's for all of us. For every person who found their courage, who spoke up for someone else, who chose to build something better instead of tearing others down." She gestured to Jordan, who had become a confident speaker and natural leader. Jordan, who showed that witnessing injustice means nothing without the courage to act on what you've seen. Her gaze moved to Maya Blackwood, Tyler's sister, who had not only overcome her own struggles with bullying but had become one of the club's most dedicated mentors for new members. Maya, who proves every day that kindness is not weakness, and that helping others find their strength makes you stronger too. Around the circle, Amira acknowledged Marcus, who now led breathing exercises for students dealing with anxiety. Isabella, who had started a peer counseling program. David Kim, who had created a student-run conflict resolution service. And dozens of others who had transformed their own pain into purpose. "My mother taught me that strength is not about what you can do to others," Amira continued. "It's about what you can help others do for themselves." This award recognizes not just one moment of self-defense, but months of building a community where everyone has the right to feel safe, respected, and valued. After the meeting, as students were leaving, a familiar figure approached. It was Blake Monroe, but the massive junior looked nothing like the intimidating presence he had once been. His shoulders were no longer squared in aggressive posture, and his expression held none of its former menace. "Amira," he said quietly, his deep voice uncertain. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" She nodded, curious about what he might have to say. Blake had largely avoided her since the courtyard incident, and when their paths did cross, he seemed more like a scared child than a threatening presence. "I wanted to thank you," he said, the words coming out awkwardly. "I know that sounds weird, considering everything, but you changed my life." Amira waited for him to continue. "After what happened, after I realized how easily you'd stopped me, I started thinking about why I needed to hurt people to feel strong. I started seeing a counselor, and I learned that I was angry about a lot of things that had nothing to do with you or anyone else at school." Blake paused, gathering courage to continue. "I learned that my dad used to beat my mom, and I thought that's what strength looked like. I thought making people afraid of me meant I was powerful, for showing me what I could become instead of just punishing me for what I was." As he walked away, Amira felt a strange sense of completion. The boy who had tormented her was gone, replaced by someone who was at least trying to build something better from the ruins of his old self. Change, she realized, wasn't just possible, it was happening all around her. The transformation of Westfield Academy didn't happen overnight, but like water wearing away stone, the steady pressure of changed hearts and minds began to reshape the very culture of the school. What had started with one girl's refusal to be a victim had grown into a movement that touched every corner of campus life. The Pencak Silat Club that Amira had founded was now the fastest-growing organization at Westfield. What had begun as a martial arts group had evolved into something much more significant. A martial arts group had evolved into something much more significant. Safe space where students could learn not just self-defense, but self-respect. "The physical techniques are important," Amira explained to the gathering of 43 students in the renovated gymnasium, "but the mental discipline is more important. My mother taught me that martial arts isn't about fighting, it's about not having to fight because you carry yourself with confidence and clarity." Jordan Lee, who had become her unofficial second-in-command, nodded from his position beside her. Over the months since the courtyard incident, he had transformed from a frightened observer to a confident leader in his own right. "Today we're going to practice situational awareness," Amira continued. "How to recognize potential threats before they become actual confrontations. How to project confidence through posture and body language. How to de-escalate situations without surrendering. Your dignity." Among the students in the circle was Tyler Blackwood's younger sister, Maya, who had indeed become a target for harassment when she started at Westfield. But unlike her predecessors, Maya had found immediate support through Amira's network, and her tormentors had quickly discovered that targeting one member of the group meant dealing with all of them. Also present was Marcus Chen, a freshman who had been struggling with anxiety since starting high school. The breathing techniques and mental focus exercises from Pencak Silat had helped him manage his panic attacks and find his voice in class discussions. "The goal isn't to create fighters," Amira emphasized as the students began their practice routines. "The goal is to create people who don't need to fight, because they command respect through their presence and their principles." The club's influence extended far beyond the gymnasium. Members wore small pins, a stylized design, representing balance and strength, that had become symbols of the anti-bullying movement at Westfield. Teachers reported that classroom dynamics had shifted, with students more willing to speak up against harassment and exclusion. Mr. Salazar, who had initially seen Amira's actions as a crisis to be managed, now recognized her as one of the most positive forces in the school's recent history. He had invited her to join a special committee tasked with developing new policies to prevent bullying and support students from diverse backgrounds. "Ms. Rahimi," he said during one committee meeting, "your insights have been invaluable in helping us understand where our previous policies fell short. Would you be willing to address the entire faculty about creating more inclusive classroom environments?" Amira accepted, and her presentation to the teachers became a turning point in how Westfield approached student welfare. She spoke about the difference between surface-level diversity initiatives and genuine cultural change, about the importance of teachers being active allies rather than passive observers. When students see teachers looking the other way during harassment, she explained, they learn that certain forms of cruelty are acceptable. But when they see teachers consistently intervening and supporting targeted students, they learn that the school community values every member. Ms. Kamensky, who had attended the presentation with obvious discomfort, approached Amira afterward. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I saw what was happening to you, and I chose to ignore it because it was easier than confronting those boys. That was cowardice, and I'm sorry." "What matters is what you do now," Amira replied, echoing the grace she had shown to Mason and Chase. The changes weren't limited to Westfield Academy. Layla, who had been documenting her sister's experiences and the school's response, had written an article about institutional responses to bullying that was published in a legal journal. The piece had gained national attention and led to speaking engagements at education conferences across the country. "My sister's story isn't unique," Layla told a conference of school administrators in Chicago. "What's unique is that she had the training and the courage to defend herself when the institution failed to protect her. Most students don't have those advantages. It's our responsibility to ensure they don't need them." The ripple effects continued to spread. Other students at other schools began sharing their own stories of harassment and institutional indifference, using Amira's example as proof that change was possible. The hashtag Real Strength Dash, inspired by Amira's definition of true power, became a rallying cry for anti-bullying advocates. But perhaps the most significant change was visible in the day-to-day interactions at Westfield itself. The hallways that had once been navigated like minefields now felt safer. Students who had previously eaten lunch alone found welcoming tables. The social hierarchy that had once seemed immutable had been replaced by multiple communities united by shared interests rather than cruel exclusion. Isabella Martinez, who had become one of Amira's closest friends, captured the transformation perfectly during a student government meeting. A year ago, being different at this school meant being a target. Now it means being valued. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because someone showed us what courage looks like. The meeting was to discuss a proposal that had come from the student body itself, a peer mediation program that would train students to help resolve conflicts before they escalated to harassment or violence. The proposal had overwhelming support and would be implemented the following semester. As the meeting concluded, Amira found herself surrounded by students seeking her input on various initiatives. There was a proposal for a multicultural festival, a request for her to mentor a group starting an anti-bullying program at the local middle school, and an invitation to speak at a neighboring high school's diversity assembly. Walking home that evening, Amira reflected on how completely her life had changed. The girl who had once tried to make herself invisible was now one of the most visible students at Westfield. The silence that had once protected her had been replaced by a voice that carried real influence. She thought of her mother, Nasrin, and the lessons that had shaped not just her martial arts training, but her entire approach to life. Strength without compassion is just brutality, her mother had said. But compassion without strength is just good intentions. True power comes from combining both. But you showed me that real power is being able to protect people, not hurt them. He gestured toward the group of students still chatting in the hallway. Look at what you built here. People respect you not because they're afraid of you, but because you make them feel safe. That's what I want to learn how to do. What are you asking? Amira said gently. I'm asking if I could join the club, Blake said. I know I don't deserve it after what I did to you. But I want to learn how to be strong the right way. I want to help protect people instead of hurting them. Amira studied his face, seeing genuine transformation in his eyes. The predatory gleam was gone, replaced by something that looked like hope mixed with humility. Being part of this community means committing to our principles, she said. No aggression, no intimidation, no using your size or strength to make others feel small. Can you commit to that? Yes, Blake said immediately. I want to be better. I want to help instead of hurt. Amira nodded. Then you're welcome. But understand, earning trust takes time. Proving you've changed requires consistent action, not just good intentions. I understand, Blake said, relief evident in his voice. Thank you for giving me a chance. As he walked away, Jordan approached Amira with a thoughtful expression. Do you really think he can change? I think everyone deserves the opportunity to become better than they were, Amira replied. But they have to choose it every day, not just once. 3 weeks later, Amira stood in the auditorium of Westfield Academy before the entire school community, students, faculty, parents, and local media. The occasion was a special assembly to recognize her national award, but she had requested the opportunity to address everyone about the changes they had all participated in creating. When I first arrived at Westfield, she began, her voice steady and clear. I thought strength meant making myself small enough that no one would notice me. I thought survival meant accepting whatever treatment others decided I deserved. She paused, looking out at faces that now watched her with respect and attention instead of indifference or cruelty. I was wrong. Real strength isn't about making yourself invisible. It's about making yourself impossible to ignore for all the right reasons. It's not about accepting whatever others decide you deserve. It's about knowing your own worth and insisting that others recognize it too. In the audience, she could see her sister Layla beaming with pride, Jordan and Isabella nodding in agreement, and even Blake Monroe listening intently from the back row. This award belongs to all of us because change doesn't happen in isolation. It spreads from person to person, from moment to moment, from choice to choice. We created something here that proves bullying doesn't have to be accepted as inevitable. Fear doesn't have to be the price of being different. And silence doesn't have to be the cost of survival. As she concluded her speech to thunderous applause, Amira felt her mother's presence as strongly as if Amira Rahimi were standing beside her. The lessons learned in their small Tehran apartment had blossomed into something that touched hundreds of lives, creating ripples that would continue spreading long after Amira graduated. Walking past the courtyard later that afternoon, the same space where her life had changed forever, Amira smiled not with bitterness or pain, but with deep satisfaction. The quiet girl from Tehran had found her voice, and in doing so, had helped others find theirs. Change, she had learned, really could happen in 30 seconds. But building a better world? That was the work of a lifetime, and Amira Rahimi was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.